It finally happened. Starship clears the tower for the third time. How did it go? Was it a success? Rocket Lab launches another mission, Astra goes private, and a Japanese rocket explodes seconds after liftoff. My name is Felix, welcome to What About It, let's dive right in. Starship updates. We've been waiting for almost 4 months and it finally paid off. The third Starship took to the skies and as always its flight was filled with emotions. What went right? What went wrong? Was it a success? Follow me to find out. These Starship launches always tend to turn into some sort of rocket thriller. Just days before the launch, the list of tasks SpaceX needed to complete seemed daunting. Yet, in typical SpaceX fashion, the team shifted into high gear and tackled each item with extraordinary efficiency. The process kicked off with a Ship 29 static fire speed run, which unfortunately didn't go quite as smoothly as hoped. To everyone's surprise, the prototype was rolled out to the suborbital site on February 29th, quickly making its way to Pad B, the last remaining suborbital test pad at the facility. SpaceX really wanted to squeeze in its test campaign before liftoff, and by March 7th, liquid oxygen began filling the prototype's tank. Initially, everything seemed on track for a successful spin prime test until Ship 29 was suddenly detanked. Unless they reverted back to conducting simple cryogenic tests, that was an unsuccessful spin prime. Yet after all, it is SpaceX we're talking about here, so just 4 days later they pressed forward with another attempt. This time, following a quick liquid oxygen fill, a successful spin prime was executed a few moments later. Although this test likely went really well, the engineers had to focus on the third Starship, resulting in the prototype being removed from Pad B the following day. A few hours later, the prototype was transported back to the production site, where it will remain until SpaceX deals with the aftermath of the launch. Considering the condition of the GSE shells following previous launches, I am relieved they chose to roll it back. Otherwise, Ship 29 likely wouldn't be flight-worthy anymore. Meanwhile, other teams worked to clear the launch area of anything that could sustain damage during liftoff, including the ship and booster transport stands. They also removed the remaining scaffolding from both the launch deck and the quick disconnect arm. With all preparations complete, the stage was set for the long-awaited launch. The Federal Aviation Administration gave us some anxiety waiting until just a day before the liftoff to issue the launch license. But in the end, SpaceX received the green light to proceed with the launch. As dawn broke on Thursday, a part of Highway 4 was closed off, ensuring the area was free of people and secure for the launch. Soon after, activity at the orbital tank farm kicked off, signaling the start of the cooling process ahead of fueling the Starship. As we approached the launch window, things didn't look too good. There were no signs of propellant being pumped into Starship's tanks. Later we finally got an update that the tanking process had to be delayed due to the boats present in the keep-out area. Fortunately, thanks to the upgrades done to the orbital tank farm, the delay wasn't a big issue, as now fueling Starship only takes about 45 minutes. Consequently, propellant loading into Booster 10 began at T-minus 53 minutes, quite a significant decrease from the previous hour and 37 minutes. 9 minutes later, Ship 28 also joined the fueling process. As the visible frost lines ascended on the vehicle's propellant tanks, SpaceX began its official webcast. This time one of the hosts was Dan Hout, who was actually sitting in front of the Mega Bay during the launch. Can I do that please? That's quite a place to host a livestream. Roughly 20 minutes before liftoff, the third iteration of the not quite orbital Starship began the engine chill. This crucial process involves circulating a tiny amount of propellant through the engines to gradually reduce their temperature. This helps prevent a thermal shock that could result from exposing ambient temperature engine parts to large quantities of cryogenic liquids. Engine chill also plays a vital role in preventing fuel flow disruptions caused by bubbles. Without it, a portion of the cryogenic fuel would start boiling inside the Raptor, which could end catastrophically. The fueling of both rocket stages was completed with just 2.5 minutes to go before liftoff. As the countdown ticked closer to zero, our excitement began to reach critical levels, but so did our anxiety. What we feared the most at that point was a potential hold at T-minus 40 seconds. While this is a point where SpaceX can safely pause all operations, there is nothing worse than seeing a hold when the emotions are at their peak. Fortunately, this time with just 32 seconds to lift off, the flight director confirmed that the launch was a go. The moment had arrived. The flame deflector sprang to life, dousing the launch pad with water as 33 Raptor engines roared to life, unleashing a force more than double that of the legendary Saturn V moon rocket. With no issues detected, the beast known as Starship was released and it began its ascent. Mirroring the success of its predecessor, all 33 engines continued to generate thrust with no signs of onboard fire. Finally! The addition of new Starlink antennas finally allowed us to witness onboard video during liftoff. And wow, what a view it was! I don't think anyone was expecting just how good that system would perform. The video was not only high definition but also surprisingly smooth. At T+52 seconds, Starship breezed through the max-Q phase, where air resistance is at its peak and potential design flaws are most likely to be exposed. Yet Starship didn't seem to care, smoothly continuing its journey upwards. 2 minutes and 42 seconds after liftoff, all but 3 Super Heavy booster Raptors shut down. Don't panic, that was planned. Moments later, the ship ignited its 3 vacuum engines, followed by the firing of 3 atmospheric Raptors, making its separation from the booster. We call this hot staging, and it was executed flawlessly. And the best part? We witnessed it from the perspective of the ship itself. This isn't CGI, dear flat earthers. As the ship continued to climb to space, the booster initiated its flip maneuver, performed by the 3 engines that remained active after most engines cut off, or MECO. This flip also marked the beginning of the boost back phase, which, unlike in the second mission, saw the prototype successfully reignite 10 engines from the second ring of Raptors. This maneuver allowed the booster to navigate back towards its designated landing site, in this case a point in the Gulf of Mexico located about 30 kilometers or 18.6 miles from the shore. The boost back ended with an engine shutdown 55 seconds later. At first sight, the burn appeared to be a complete success. But if we look a little closer at the shutdown sequence, there may have been some issues. The Raptors began to shut down in a circular pattern, but for some reason that sequence paused for a few seconds before the rest of the engines were turned off. This might have been a simple telemetry glitch, but it is worth considering when looking at what happened next. As Booster 10 was near its apogee, it began a slow reorientation to the landing position using its vents, which also act as thrusters. Less than 2 minutes later, Super Heavy was just 50 kilometers or 30 miles above the surface. At this altitude, the atmosphere is dense enough for grid fins actually to have an effect on the rocket. It is crazy to think that these are almost 2.5 meters or 8 feet wide, and yet they can change their position so rapidly. The descent phase looked a bit violent, although this is also something we can sometimes observe during Falcon 9 landings. To perform a soft water landing, Booster 10 was supposed to reignite some of its engines and use them to decelerate to just 8 meters or 26 feet per second. That's not really what happened. We weren't told how many Raptors were required to get rid of all that velocity, but it definitely wasn't just 3. The ignition sequence started just 1 kilometer or 0.6 miles above the water with the firing of 1 Raptor center, followed by 2 engines from the second ring. This wasn't even close to enough thrust to slow the booster down. Instead of touching down at 8 meters or 26 feet per second, Super Heavy smashed into the Gulf of Mexico at a speed of over 300 meters or almost 1,000 feet per second if the telemetry was correct. Technically, you can call this a water landing, just not a soft one. This is where the history of the legendary Booster 10 ended, but we still have to talk about Ship 28. Its journey was far from over. Things were looking much more optimistic here, with all 6 Raptors continuing to fire without an issue. Just 3.5 minutes into the flight, the prototype crossed the international boundary of space, located 100 kilometers or 62 miles above Earth's surface. It's the Kármán line. The next few minutes weren't filled with too much action, but in this case, that is a good thing. At T+8 minutes and 4 seconds, the upper stage of Starship officially outlived its predecessor. Now it was time for the most nail-biting moment. That's right, engine shutdown. Numerous upgrades added by SpaceX's engineers to this prototype definitely made a difference, as Ship 28 successfully turned off all 6 Raptors without going boom. Following that, it was time to test out the PEZ dispenser, aka the payload bay. We got a call out that such a test began at T+12 minutes, but we wouldn't get a visual confirmation of this maneuver until over 4 minutes later. I wasn't expecting that we would get such footage in the first place. You can even see how the payload bay is rapidly depressurizing. As everyone was focused on the insane views from the PEZ dispenser, SpaceX initiated the propellant transfer demonstration. It aimed to move 10 metric tons of liquid oxygen from the header tank to the main LOX tank. Obviously, SpaceX wasn't going to show us the inside of the propellant tanks, so all we got was a post on X confirming that the demonstration took place. 24 minutes into the flight, Ship 28 hit its apogee, or the furthest point from Earth on its flight path, at just about 234 kilometers or 145 miles. 6 minutes later, SpaceX attempted to close the payload bay door, which is where the streak of success ended. Something must have gotten jammed as the door began to oscillate and failed to seal the payload bay. You can't have everything, right? Around 10 minutes later, Ship 28 began its flip in preparation for its retrograde burn, which was supposed to move its splashdown zone closer to Madagascar. Unfortunately, while the flip was successful, SpaceX decided to skip this step and instead focus on collecting data. This decision might also have been influenced by issues with keeping the upper stage of Starship stable. I pointed it out on our live stream. For some reason, the rocket was constantly spinning along its roll axis, which, as far as we are aware, wasn't planned. As Ship 28 approached re-entry, it was definitely on the right trajectory, as we actually saw the aforementioned Madagascar pass by below the rocket. At T+45 minutes, the prototype moved its flaps into the re-entry position as it continued its descent. From the footage provided by SpaceX, it's clear that while they had some control over the ship, it couldn't stop its roll. This resulted in one of the most beautiful but also most bizarre re-entry videos in the history of astronautics. As plasma began to form around Starship's body, it was still spinning, even at one point re-entering the atmosphere on its side. The re-entry also proved just how powerful the Starlink constellation is. Somehow the prototype was able to stream live HD video from one of its flaps while the camera was engulfed in plasma. This is the best Starlink ad ever. Finally, at around 70 kilometers or 44 miles, the plasma got so intense that the connection dropped. We were hoping that it was just a blackout period. However, as the mission crossed the 1 hour mark, it was pretty clear that Ship 28 was dead. It's a shame that Starship didn't make it to the splashdown, but let's keep in mind that the chance of it actually pulling this off was close to zero in the first place. With both vehicles lost, the FAA has already instructed SpaceX to begin our favorite mishap investigation. Hopefully it won't take too long this time, as the company already has a backlog of prototypes waiting to be tested. Per Elon Musk, we should expect to see at least 6 more launches this year. That was a heck of a ride, wasn't it? Did you watch it live? What's your take on the outcome of this mission? Was it a complete success, or would you classify it as a failure? Please let me know in the comments. Now, you've watched more than half the video and you are still watching. Thank you, this means you like it. We've looked into our channel metrics and there are over 2 million returning monthly viewers who have not subscribed yet. Help us improve the channel even further by double checking that you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our updates. And while you're at it, give us a like and become a wise supporter for exclusive SpaceX updates. With it, you get access to daily Starbase photo galleries, including satellite, aerial and ground photos of SpaceX's progress and countless other extras on top. And no matter how much you decide to give, everyone gets the same supporter content and access. You decide what you want to give. The link to our Patreon page is in the description. Thanks to all the supporters who help fulfill dreams for our team. We cannot thank you enough. You rock. Now, for a very short break, let's talk about weather. Imagine you got your chair set out and you're waiting for the countdown to hit T-0. But there is that dark cloud coming in and you can already see that dreaded lightning. Weather. Anyone who's watched a rocket launch before knows how much weather can ruin the show, from dense clouds to a complete scrub. Imagine you had an app that could easily tell you if the launch will be scrubbed. With My Radar, you don't have to guess. Say goodbye to unexpected scrubs. Wouldn't that be extra helpful? They've even taken it a step further, launching one 150 satellites with SpaceX starting at the end of this year. These satellites capture images and monitor events like wildfires and hurricanes, all easily accessible within the app. Space, weather, safety, my radar ties it all together. With the orbital tracking, simply input a space track ID and there it is. Real-time tracking of any satellite or module you fancy. Dive in, explore, and you just might discover an indispensable companion for all your adventures. Stay ahead, stay informed with my radar. You're not just informed, you're prepared. Alright, hopefully safe and dry, let's continue. Going back to the news, let's talk about one of my personal favorites, Rocket Lab. They've managed to carve out a niche for themselves in the market where SpaceX has been dominating the small-sat scene with its transporter missions. Rocket Lab's launch frequency is on the rise every year, and they are setting their sights on breaking their launch record yet again in 2024. Following 2 successful missions, another Electron was erected at the launch pad at New Zealand's Launch Complex 1. This facility currently has 2 pads, 1A and 1B, the latter of which came into operation in February 2022. Interestingly, since the introduction of Pad 1B, Pad 1A has seen action only a handful of times, and it's been nearly 2 years since its last launch. They might be reserving one pad for urgent response missions, like those the Space Force might need, where a rocket has to be launch ready within 3 days. On the other hand, it might simply be that Pad 1B is so low maintenance that it makes sense to focus on keeping only one pad active, given that they don't launch that often. Yet. March 12th marked Rocket Lab's 45th mission, named All Night Long. Get it? All night long. You want me to sing? Their ability to come up with such playful names never ceases to amaze me. This launch was the 4th for Synspective, a company that's making waves, pun intended, with its synthetic aperture radar or SAR satellites. But Felix, what does this even mean? What is SAR? Great question. Viewing Earth from space presents numerous challenges, with potential obstructions like clouds, trees, or smoke from wildfires blocking the view. In these instances, a conventional camera doesn't quite cut it, which is precisely where SAR technology shines. Rather than relying on optical sensors, SAR utilizes a moving antenna emitting waves capable of penetrating barriers like clouds or foliage and reflecting off the ground. The satellite then captures these waves, transforming them into a matrix of points that represent the terrain below. The ability of SAR to operate under virtually any condition, including at night and through clouds, is extremely valuable. One such satellite was aboard the Electron for this mission. It marked another successful launch for Rocket Lab as they placed the payload in its intended orbit without any problem. Unfortunately, this mission did not include a recovery attempt, so the booster was not fished out of the ocean. Rocket Lab is already working on their next Electron, currently scheduled to launch on March 20th. This time it will take off from American soil, specifically Wallops Island. Meanwhile, not all small satellite companies have been as fortunate. Astra Space, for example, has faced numerous challenges since its inception in 2016 by Chris Kemp. They aimed to revolutionize the small satellite market not through reusability, but by manufacturing rockets so affordable that they could be mass-produced on an assembly line. Similar to what SpaceX is doing with Starship, minus the rapid reusability part. The company's ambition was high, with claims of weekly launches by 2023 and nearly daily launches by 2025. However, as you've probably noticed, we aren't talking about an Astra launch in every episode, so something didn't go as planned. The company's maiden rocket, dubbed Rocket 1, took to the skies in 2018. Though not publicized and deemed a failure by the FAA, Astra considered it a success. Later that year, Rocket 2 launched, but also failed despite Astra's optimistic view. Not the greatest start, but inaugural launches are never easy. After a period of silence, Astra returned in 2020 with Rocket 3.0, which suffered a launchpad fire and was lost. Then September 2020 saw the launch of Rocket 3.1, the first vehicle theoretically capable of orbit, only to fail a minute into flight. 3 months later, the 3.2 version of the rocket finally made it to space, but an issue with the second stage ended the mission prematurely, adding to Astra's series of unfortunate events. I'm beginning to see a pattern here. I wish I could say that Astra smoothed out all their issues by their next launch, but instead it resulted in the now infamous rocket slide video. A must-watch for every spaceflight enthusiast. That was one of the craziest launches I have ever seen. Enduring the loss of 6 rockets would typically spell the end for most companies, yet Astra persevered. On November 20th, 2021, they achieved a huge milestone by successfully reaching orbit, reigniting hope that they're on the right track. However, that optimism was short-lived as their subsequent launch suffered a payload loss. March 2022 saw a brief moment of redemption with a second successful launch, but the pattern of alternating success and failure persisted, leaving the company with a success rate of just 28.5%. The logical next step was to diagnose and resolve the issues with Rocket 3 to improve this statistic. Instead, though, Astra chose to abandon Rocket 3 in favor of developing Rocket 4, a bold move especially during a period of plummeting stock prices. From its peak in 2021, Astra's stock value nosedived by 99%, bringing the company to the verge of bankruptcy. This is why recently they had to take action to prevent this. The company's founder offered to buy back the shares from investors for a fraction of their original price, taking Astra private. It wasn't a good deal, but probably the only one that wouldn't end in bankruptcy. The future of Astra is now shrouded in uncertainty. Currently, Astra's offerings are limited to 2 products: their spacecraft engine line, which has encountered its own set of delays, and the aforementioned Rocket 4. However, despite early signs of testing, activity around the rocket has quieted down significantly. With their financial reserves nearly depleted, I don't see how they could recover from this. The old saying, "space is hard," is true not only in the physical challenge of reaching the stars, but also in the complexity of running a space company. Another firm that has come face to face with this saying is the Japanese company SpaceX. They've developed a rocket called Kairos, which specializes in deploying small satellites. Kairos has a slightly smaller capacity than Rocket Lab's Electron. It is designed to launch about 150 kilograms or 330 pounds to a sun-synchronous orbit. It's a 4-stage rocket, with its first 3 stages powered by solid fuel and the final stage utilizing liquid propellant for enhanced orbit precision. Kairos' maiden flight took place on March 13th, and true to the nature of inaugural launches, it didn't go very well. Moments after liftoff, the flight termination system was activated, rapidly disassembling the rocket in mid-air. We don't have an official explanation for what went wrong, but video from the launch shows the rocket significantly changing its angle shortly after liftoff, which likely triggered the termination. Say it with me, space is hard. Yet, what made this failure launch particularly interesting was an extraordinary moment captured by an on-site photographer. What you see here is the satellite itself plummeting back to Earth. To my knowledge, this is the first time ever someone was able to capture such an event. Fingers crossed that the next launch will be a success. That's it for today. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe for more awesome content. This is what fuels the algorithm and helps us immensely. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. A link is in the description. And if you want to train your space IQ even further, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. And as always, A ambient and P ambient. We call Space Ford, and then I don't know, we'll see.